Take the seats, please. It's time to start our meeting. So, regularly scheduled summit meeting of April 17th, 2018. Madam Clerk, please do the roll call.
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Steele.
Here.
Ms. LaFrance.
Here.
Mr. Trainee.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Mr. Croft.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Mr. Constant.
Here.
Ms. Demboski.
Present.
Mr. Dyson.
Here.
Chair Trainee, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Mr. Constant, would you listen to the pledge, sir?
Sure.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
I knew that was going to happen.
What's that?
I knew that was going to happen.
What? The coffee?
I just knew.
There are no minutes for previous meetings. We're all caught up. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Assembly committee reports. John, we'll start with you.
Oh, thanks. Community and Economic Development Committee has not met recently. We will meet in a few weeks, and we have a couple marijuana licenses, and we'll also review the rules on reporting when ownership of a marijuana operation changes, and just kind of make it really clear on what level of change we're doing. Also, on April 25th, Chris Rawl with Transportation for America will be speaking at the Church of Love at 5:15 till about 7:30 on various opportunities for using federal funding for our road projects and so on.
Mr. Rivera, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I reported at last week's meeting, we will have a Assembly Committee on Homelessness meeting tomorrow from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Mayor's Conference Room, 8th floor in City Hall. We will be reviewing the initial numbers of the point-in-time count done in January. We'll have a presentation on a project regarding housing homeless veterans, and we'll continue to learn about the city plan to end homelessness. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Steele, sir.
Mr. Chairman, yes. Enterprise Committee meeting Thursday at 11 a.m.
Melissa France, ma'am.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar, sir.
Nothing to report.
Mr. Croft.
The Public Safety Committee will meet tomorrow at 12:30 after the Homelessness Committee meeting, but we're going to meet downstairs in the Assembly Conference Room. We'll be hearing a presentation from the Criminal Justice Commission.
Have you heard anything? I heard something, a rumor coming out of the Department of Correction, that they want to change driving under influence to make it less painful for the individual caught. Have you heard any rumors on that coming out of Juneau at all?
No.
You might want to check it out.
Okay.
I'd heard a rumor. Mr. Peterson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Ethics and Election Committee will be meeting on April 25th. That's Wednesday at noon. And right now it's scheduled at room 240 at City Hall. But sometimes we end up meeting down at our new election center. So keep an eye on your emails, and we'll let you know exactly where we're going to be meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant, sir.
Thank you. No committee report. However, I do want to make sure that we all recognize that we have some work coming up on the issue of the removal of the exemptions for violation of that 880 section of the code, and I spoke with Mr. Croft about scheduling that joint committee meeting between Public Safety and Homeless before the work session, and I'm hoping for a date on that meeting sooner than later so that the public can be notified properly and be in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Demboski, ma'am.
No report.
Mr. Dyson, sir.
Nothing to report.
Okay. We're down to addendum to agenda. Anything?
Is there a mayor's report at this?
We didn't have one on here. Oh, there's one. Mr. Mayor, sorry I missed you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have nothing to report today. Thank you.
Excellent.
I thought you were going to change it up. Okay, Mr. Dunbar, I need a motion to incorporate the addendum to the agenda, because, and any laid on the table
Yep.
items.
Move to incorporate the addendum to the agenda and laid on the table item 9A1 AR 2018-125 and item 9D1 AM 282 2018 into the agenda.
Second.
Okay, is there any objection to that? Seeing none, we approve that addendum into the agenda and laid on the table. Now I need a motion on the consent agenda as amended, sir.
Do you need me to read those titles
You
into the
can if you
record?
want. There's only two of them. Go ahead.
Okay. Item 9A1, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing Barbara Jones, Municipal Election Administrator, and congratulating all of the election workers for a well-executed and successful first Municipality of Anchorage vote-by-mail election in 2018. Item 9D1, let's see, that's AM 282 2018, certification of the April 3rd, 2018 regular municipal election.
Anything else?
Nope, that's all, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any item you want to pull, John?
And no.
Felix?
No items, Mr.
Tim?
Chair.
No items.
No items.
Then, Forrest?
No items.
Eric?
No items.
Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Why don't you?
I'd like to pull 9A1.
Thank you, sir. Chris?
Nothing, thank you.
Amy? Fred?
Negative.
Okay. Let's vote on the balance of the consent agenda
So-
as amended.
So I move to approve the consent agenda.
I need a second on it. Let's now vote on it. Ask unanimous consent. See no objection, Madam Clerk, that's been approved. Mr. Peterson, we go back to when you pulled, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move to approve.
Item
Second.
9A1,
9A1.
and that's AR number 2018-125.
You're correct.
Is there a second?
I seconded it.
Ask unanimous consent. See no objection, that's approved. Pete, you're going to read it?
Yes, I am.
Barbara? Come to the podium, man.
It's going to be Dick presenting, I believe.
Yes.
A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing Barbara Jones, Municipal Election Administrator, and congratulating all of the election workers for a well-executed and successful first Municipality of Anchorage vote-by-mail election in 2018. Whereas, Barbara Jones began her career with the Municipality of Anchorage in February of 1999 as a staff attorney with the Equal Rights Commission. And in March of 2002, she was promoted to Executive Director of the Anchorage Equal Rights Commission. After a period of acting from January of 2011, Ms. Jones became the Municipal Ombudsman in May of 2011, and then in July of 2012, Ms. Jones moved into the position of Municipal Clerk. And whereas, pursuant to AMC 28.10.020, one of the duties of the municipal clerk is to supervise all municipal elections. And whereas on December 8, 2015, the Anchorage Assembly approved AR 2015-314S, a resolution directing the municipal clerk's office to explore implementing a vote-by-mail election process beginning with the April 2018 regular election. Whereas the April 3rd, 2018 municipal election was the first implementation of vote-by-mail in a municipal election history, breaking our record for voter turnout with a 36.31% of registered voters casting 79,295 ballots. And whereas the success of the 2018 vote-by-mail election can be attributed to the leadership of Ms. Jones, the unwavering dedication of all the election employees who worked tirelessly for months preparing for the election, and then long past Election Day to finish all of the tasks necessary to complete the election process, and finally, the Alaskan voters who embraced the convenience of vote-by-mail and drove the higher voter turnout. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Anchorage Assembly recognizes and honors Barbara Jones and all of the election workers for their outstanding effort and celebrates the fruition of all their hard work, a successful, record-breaking first vote-by-mail election in Anchorage in 2018. Passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly the 17th day of April, 2018.
Thank you. I really appreciate that you thanked our voters and our election workers, and so you all better come up here and have a picture with me. So Amy Solberg, she's been our election coordinator. Amy Strohmeyer volunteered. She was a Dropbox coordinator and an envelope opener. Rose has kept us honest with money. Come on up, Rose, and helped us with financial analysis, helped us make sure that we're using that capital money correctly. Glennis Ireland and Joyce Anderson are here from the Election Commission, and I know my team in the back here, Carolyn Hall Jensen, Nina Mangini, Cindy Hawkins, come on up, Karen Leffler, and Elaine Leffler. I see I got those mixed up, didn't I? So anyway, this is really part of our core team, and you know there is, and the most important one, come on down, Lisa. You know we couldn't have done this without Lisa serving as acting clerk in the clerk's office, and all of the rest of the people in the clerk's office and at the election center. It couldn't have happened without everybody working together. So thank you very much. Yeah.
I'll tell you one.
All right, thank you.
I'll text it to Lisa. There we go.
Thank you.
Mr. Peterson has a comment. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to personally thank all of the election workers and Ms. Jones for their hard work and dedication and planning, the planning that went into this election. I mean, we've been working on this for 3.5 years. It just didn't just pull off accidentally overnight. And so we thought of most everything in advance of things that might possibly go wrong, but they invented a couple at the last minute on us. But we'll be more ready for the election next year. And I'm just extremely happy and proud that we were able to make this happen and set the record on top of it all. Thank you.
Mr. Constant, sir.
Thank you, and I gave you my congratulations earlier, and I'm going to challenge you with a new task, and that is to help us come up with a fiscal breakdown of what we spent, how we spent it, what were one-time costs, and what we can project the cost of an election to be going forward. Thank you.
Ms. Dembowski, ma'am.
Thank you. As always, Mr. Constance, one step ahead. No, there's no question. This was a monumental task made possible only by the tireless work of our election workers, our election commission, and of course the clerk's office and all the staff. It was overwhelming at times, I'm sure, but it was a monumental task, and I personally want to say thank you to each and every one of you. And when we get to the election certification, I'll just have a couple of questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Croft, sir.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it. We all have. Doing a new thing, a very, very new thing, particularly in such a sensitive area, is difficult and risky, right? It's easier just to do the same thing you've done. There was criticism early on when there were some glitches. You didn't know if they were going to blow up into huge problems or stay glitches. Thanks to your management, they got taken care of. They got solved. But really, we took a risky big step forward, and you made it work. I think it's really important. We're all impressed on the numbers, but what it means is our prior system just didn't work for a lot of people, and another 10% or another 20,000 people got involved in our election because you worked hard and others worked hard, and we took a risk to try and make it a more responsive process. And that's huge. It's not just numbers, right? It's about an increase in participation. We've been bemoaning the lack of participation, and some of it, at least, is we didn't make it very easy for people, and we're trying to fix that. Thank you.
Barbara, one comment from me is every place you've had you function, it's been to fix a problem. When I brought you in as ombudsman, you worked tirelessly and solved the problem there. We brought you in as clerk, you worked there and took care of that. And now with this, you've done everything we asked you. Thank you very much. Anything we can do to help you, let us know. When I look at the numbers, I look at 2017, we had, I think, 23% voter turnout. This one, we have 36% voter turnout. And that's a remarkable turnaround. And there's a lot of people that voted this time that hadn't for years, which you saw with their voting pattern. And they said because we couldn't go and stand in line. So this worked for a lot of people. A lot of them to sit around their dining room table and look at the candidates and the issues and decide, well, how they want to vote. So thank you very much, because I know you put your heart and soul into this. And thanks to everybody involved in this. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, moving down the agenda. We're now down to special orders. Item 15A, certification of the April 3rd, 2018 regular municipal election.
Move to certify the regular municipal election of April 3rd, 2018.
Second.
Discussion from assembly members. Ms. Dombowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a couple of questions for Ms. Jones, if you don't mind. So I'm just going through, I kept notes on what my most common complaints were, because it sounds like I'm the only assembly member who heard anything negative. But the biggest concerns I heard from people were identity theft, so they were afraid of signing on the outside of the envelope. The other thing was people were concerned about a person who's only had limited training looking at signatures versus an optical program that maybe can read signatures and match, because I've heard other jurisdictions might have that technology. And the third thing that I heard of a concern was just general ballot security. And I know you were super responsive when I sent you that note about people referring to a social media post that somebody had voted multiple times. And I see that. I think that's the one that I referred to that I see listed in here. Okay. So those were the three main concerns that I heard. Was there anything else that you heard that came up that people were mostly concerned of that the Elections and Ethics Committee or the Commission will be looking into further?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot that we're going to be looking at, a lot more than that. I think tomorrow, all of the whole election team is getting together from 1 until 3, and the election commissioners are going to join us. We're going to talk about what worked and what didn't work and what we could do better. I think we all have lots of ideas about things that we could do better. We have a stakeholders meeting coming up next week. At the stakeholders committee meeting, the plan is, those are our voters, and the plan is to ask them what worked and what didn't. And so we're going to gather all of that information too. I think one of the other issues that we have discussed that will be back before the Ethics and Elections Committee is return postage. I think we know that that's an issue. It brings with it other problems, because if you have prepaid postage on an envelope, it doesn't get a postmark. So then the code would need to change to say, we only count ballot envelopes received by 8 p.m. It wouldn't be postmarked anymore, because there would be no postmark. So that would be a big change, but we're going to look at it. So that is one issue. Let's see, the signatures on the outside of the envelope, that certainly was an issue that voters were concerned about. Our call center did over 1,000 calls in one day. And one of the things that we told voters was that you can use one of the secure drop boxes. You can drop it off at an accessible vote center. And the purpose for that was then your signature wouldn't be in the mail. Our numbers that I reported to you, I believe they're on page 3 and 4, show that the drop boxes were not as much used as the U.S. mail was for a return source. I admit that surprised us a little bit. In other jurisdictions, I think I've reported to you that in the last election, the November 2016 election in Colorado, 70% of the ballot envelopes were returned by Dropbox, which meant only 30% by mail and at their vote centers. So I'm not sure if one of the other questions is, do we have enough drop boxes? Do we have enough accessible vote centers? And we have begun to explore those issues as well, which is very helpful to help those numbers. They're broken down by individual drop box and individual accessible vote center. So we know the numbers, the usage numbers. So those are issues that we're looking at. The human versus optical, there was a cost for that. It was my understanding that the cost was an additional $50,000. And we, at the time, thought that there would be more reassurance to the public to say that we had 2 people that are reviewing signatures that are citizens and voters in this community. And we thought that was more helpful than having computer scanning. But it's certainly something that we can look at. It does come at a pretty steep cost, though.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Just on that point, I'll let you finish your list, but on that point, I think if the human element was a secondary check, because a lot of people brought up to me, I had probably a dozen people, and to me that's a lot, bring up to me, well, how long does FBI handwriting analysts go through? I mean, how long was this course? And so people were really questioning the human element, and I think if the human element was the fail-safe and not the standard, they might feel like some impartiality would be there. So it's just something to consider.
I think we should continue that discussion. And then the last question that you had, Ms. Domboski, concerned, ballot security and to some degree fraud. And I think we've addressed that on the second page. Most of that page we've taken up discussing what we believed were the challenge that was filed and attempts where people voted twice. And this was all that we had from the election. In addition, there were 100 voters whose envelopes were rejected because the signatures didn't match. And we contacted those voters. But I think that's one of the other ways that we're attempting to address and make sure that people aren't fraudulently voting or voting for someone else.
Sure. And one other one I forgot to mention. It was sparked because of a picture that was taken and posted by the clerk's office. It was chain of custody of the ballots. And there were a number of people who were discussing chain of custody. Basically, when they come out of a lockbox or one of our drop-off centers, they should be put into a box. They should be locked, or there should be a tab or something, and they shouldn't be unsealed till they get to the election central. That was a comment that people brought up to me. I hadn't seen the post, and then I saw it, and basically the tubs of the ballots were being transported in an open container. So I think that's one area that probably could have a very simple, quick fix, and frankly would reassure the public a little more that, yes, I put it in the drop box, it's sealed, it's secured, they come out of the drop box, they get sealed, and they don't get unsealed until they're brought to the election central.
Ms. Domboski, could you please send me that post? I'm not familiar with it, and I don't believe that is our procedure. We have black ballot bags that are sealed, and the ballots are supposed to go into one of the black sealed bags, and then they are tallied by the 2 Dropbox workers and 2 intake workers at the election center. So I'd like to see the post so that I can understand it.
It might be a full misunderstanding of what was in those carts, but it looked like ballots.
Okay.
And so that's why it was brought to my attention.
Okay.
And my last question, because I know others want to get in the queue. Okay, I have 2. One, with response, how successful were the cure letters that you sent out?
I think that the cure letters were very successful, and I will tell you that is mostly to credit Nina Mangini and her team. And I have a note in here. Let's see. It would be the second to the last bullet on the first page. 779 opportunity to cure letters were sent, and only 166 voters who received those letters had their ballot envelope rejected by the commission. So the remainder of those voters cured whatever problem there was with their ballot envelope.
Okay. And my last question, we're trying to measure the success of the election, and one of the things that comes to my mind is this body, prior to going vote by mail, had voted to move the elections to the general election for the state. Now, there was definitely challenges with that. But do you know off the top of your head, I was looking at the last gubernatorial election, because that would be this year, to compare it to. Overall, the turnout in that general election was 56%, but I don't know of that how much Anchorage's turnout was. Do you know off the top of your head?
I'm sorry, I do not.
That's okay. And I bring that up specifically because if we're going to judge the overwhelming success of how this works, I think we would judge it on what we were going to do. We chose not to. Now we're comparing it to another Anchorage municipal election. But it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the fall, to see what the state voter turnout will be here in Anchorage, because I think that's really the benchmark that I'm looking at to see if we really got the most bang for our buck and we got the most voter participation. But as Mr. Constant said earlier, I'll also be very interested to see what our one-time costs were and what you anticipate our ongoing costs will be per election. Thank you.
You're welcome. Ms. Domboski and Mr. Constant, Rose Foley and I have already worked up those numbers. We're prepared to report those either to the Ethics and Elections Committee or to the Assembly at a work session. And we were also planning on doing a final vote-by-mail report for you in May, and we would include the financials in that report.
Barbara, we'll set a work session up on that in May, because
Okay.
I'd like to give the Assembly the time to take a look at your answers to questions. Thank you. Mr. Dunbar, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. So I have a comment and then a question. The comment first, and having gone to the meeting of the Election Commission where you certified the election, or not certified, but when you looked at the question ballots, I know how much it pained you and the Election Commission to reject some of these ballots. And I think that we will continue to get better at engaging members of the public and hopefully bring that number down. But it's still, I mean, considering 79,295 ballots were cast, I think you have a fairly remarkable success rate. And as you said, the cure letters worked well. The other thing that stands out to me from this report is, again, 79,295 ballots cast, and it looks about like 5 potential cases of voter fraud, unless you assume that all the signatures that didn't match were also involved in some way. And I think that tracks with the broader experience of the country as a whole, which is that actual voter fraud or attempted voter fraud is extremely rare because it has only a marginal benefit to the person who does it and potentially a huge consequence. And we have these screenings in place to catch a lot of them. And if you look at some of the ones that we did catch, it doesn't even seem like it was malicious in a lot of those cases. It was a mistake. So that's my comment. My question is, so I know that I don't know if it's reported here, but there was a back and forth with the state, correct? About we got 20,000. Was it 20,000 returned bad addresses or something along those lines? And I want to ask you about the process by which we coordinate with the state to continually improve our data. Because what I don't want to have is every election this happens again, where we mail it out and we're basing our information on the state and we get a wave of these returned to us. So could you walk us through what processes there are to sort of scrub the state's data and share data with the state?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Through the chair, the first process started in or before January when we sent out the postcards. So we sent out the postcards to 208,000 registered voters. The code requires us to do that to the first 3 years of vote by mail. So that is at a cost to us to mail postcards, both the printing and the mailing. But I think what we want to measure is to make sure that that cost was less than the cost to mail ballot packages to people who aren't at those addresses. And also, it gives people notice that this is coming. This is the first time we did any outreach to voters about a municipal election. So in that process, there were an additional 12,500 Anchorage voters who were determined to be undeliverable, and the state entered those voters into its database. So the result was that about 22,000 ballot packages were not mailed out of the 218,000 registered voters. Those were not mailed because those voters were undeliverable, and that's what you instructed us in the code, that we would not mail to undeliverable voters. Then in addition to that, we received another 20+ thousand ballot envelopes returned to us that were also undeliverable. And those envelopes, we've figured out a way to run those through the mail sorter, and we've recorded the information from those envelopes. So we've recorded the voter ID and the reason that it was returned to us, undeliverable, forward expired. And that information we're going to get back to the state. Since we've run it through the system, it'll be available to the state. And we have to continue to work with the state and ask the state if they will enter those addresses as undeliverable. So there's not just the 22,000, there's an additional 21,000 of voters in the database that are undeliverable. Now, of those, it appears that we've had about 1,500 voters out of that group that actually voted in the election. So we know that a number of voters, their address was just bad in the state's voter registration database, and it will be updated. So we've got updates for the people that are still here and have good addresses, but we're going to work with the state and make sure all 40,000 of those not good addresses are recorded in their database.
Mr. Dunbar.
I'll say thank you, Ms. Jones. Thank you, Mr. Trainey.
Thank you. Mr. Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Barbara, good job. You guys have been working for years, literally. Hopefully the training was good. I know you guys went outside, a couple of you anyway, and took some training. It just seems to me like this is a great first election, and that it will only get better as the public gets used to it. I got a lot of calls of people who just didn't understand it, and they got a ballot that didn't belong to them, and the person had moved, and they didn't get their ballot, and just a little concern about how it was going to work. But I think every time we do it, we need to keep after it and make sure that we upgrade it, and it's going to become the way things are done. I'm sure the state will pick it up at some point, but I think, from everything I hear from the Anchorage voters, they love it. It works, and so congrats.
Thank you, Mr. Steele.
Mr. Wilton, sir.
Oh, thanks. I think it was a success too, and really preferred it. And I'm happy that we got more people voting. But also, concern of mine is that people vote more educated. And I found that when I had it on my kitchen table, and I'm a pretty educated voter, but I did end up Googling some stuff, and I think that's very important, and it makes a better result. I want to follow up one thing that Forrest was talking about is we sent out the postcards, and a bunch came back non-deliverable, so those come off of the list. But then when you sent the envelopes, you also got 20,000 something back. I mean, how would you have both?
Well, Mr. Weddleton, I expect that it's because the postcards were forwardable. We wanted those postcards to go wherever that person lived so that they could update their address with the state or say, I'm not living in Alaska and I want you to cancel my voter registration. So what happened when the ballot packages were mailed, those were not forwardable. So they were returned either undeliverable or forward expired.
Okay, thanks.
And Mr. Weddleton, I would like to add on the education, I appreciate that comment. I think our education and outreach team led by Carolyn Hall really did a fabulous job. But I do think that we've always got room for improvement, and we have some great ideas for next year to help make it easier for voters even next year.
Okay, Mr. Constant, sir.
Thank you. So if you'll look at this AM 282 2018, that list, you'll notice that the largest category of rejected ballots was the ballots postmarked after Election Day. So that's obviously an area that we need to do some homework on to make sure people, but what is not obvious on this list is where that 100 not signature match was over 700. And so the team worked really hard and got that number down to 100, which is extraordinary. And the other two categories I think that are of note are registered outside of the MOA, but I believe those are now registered in the MOA because of that yellow form, and then returned without envelopes. And that's that security concern, people who thought, I don't want my information on the ballot. And so that was interesting to see. But the most interesting thing, if you think about numbers and statistics, is, so the state started out with a number of 218,000, right, which is a gross number. And we know that there were 22,000 that didn't get mailed out because we know they weren't real ballots at this point because they haven't participated. And then you subtract the additional 21,000 that were returned to us. Now, I don't know, Barbara, did you get the number of those that were returned but still voted yet?
We think it's probably about 1,500.
So if you were to add back in that 1,500, I'm not going to do that now because I already did the math. So 22,000, 21,000 is 43,000. 218 minus 43,000 is 175,000. If you divide the 79,295 by 175, you get 45% return. Right, so when you correct for actual ballots that went to actual people, we had 45% of the people in this city cast a ballot in this election. It's nearly half. We're really close. It's true. And so I look forward to cleaned up voter rolls and this process going forward so we get a tighter and tighter system. But look at that number. If you correct for the state's weakness in their system, we have a pretty good deal. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Jones, thank you to you and your team for all your hard work. One question on next week's stakeholders meeting. Is that where residents should go if they want to raise concerns, or will there be another meeting or an opportunity for open discussion?
Actually, the stakeholders group meeting, there's about 50 people on the stakeholders group. We were going to specifically ask the stakeholders, it's a public meeting, so anyone is welcome. But we weren't specifically looking for voter, the public input. I think since the Assembly made the decision to go to vote by mail and we're implementing it, I think that might be something that might be more appropriate for the Assembly to do, or if you'd like to give me direction to do that, we would go ahead and do that. But the stakeholders group, you know, and one of the other things, you can email elections@muni.org. We're taking comments and suggestions to fix things, so that would probably be best.
Thank you. Ms. Dombowski, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't going to get in the queue a second time, but Mr. Constant has inspired me. You know, I learned something in college. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. So I don't really buy his numbers because we were sidebarring here and talking. Listen, we got a lot of rejected ballots. There's no question about that, but it doesn't mean those people didn't move to a different part of Anchorage or have a different address here in Anchorage. Just because someone chooses not to participate in the electoral process doesn't mean that they're not a voter anymore. They could still be living here, just choosing not to vote. So I think we have to be careful when we throw out statistical numbers on the fly. I think it's something worth vetting. But I would say the highlight for me in this election, clearly when you start something new, there's going to be bumps along the way. The question is, do you learn from those? Do you take the citizens' concerns seriously, and do you try to mitigate those concerns? One of the biggest concerns I've had as I've watched what has happened, it is absolutely 100% clear to me the state has not done an adequate job maintaining their voter rolls. Clear as day. So I think that has to be a focus for us as Alaskans, is to push the lieutenant governor and the governor, whomever they will be, to make sure we have adequate voter rolls that are routinely purged, that are routinely maintained, because clearly it has an impact on municipalities that choose to go this route, and it's costly. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Ms. Dombowski. You're absolutely right. You know, the responsibility for the voter registration list lies with the state of Alaska, specifically Lieutenant Governor. So this has to be corrected. This is going to point out to them the problem they've got. I don't know the last time they actually cleared the voter registration list completely. This gives them the chance to take this and work from it. Let's hope they do. Only complaint I heard for people that like standing in line. So don't worry, in August and November they get to do it again. They get to stand in line. We haven't heard one name mentioned, that's Dennis Wheeler. I'd like to publicly thank him for all of his effort in this, because I know everybody did a lot, but I watched Dennis working on these machines, getting them to work correctly. And I appreciate what he did for us with this election. So if you talk to him, would you pass on to him my thanks?
I certainly will, Mr. Trainee, and I would like to add that I think we were very lucky to have RDI as our project manager on this project. I will tell you that we worked with a couple of people from RDI, and when we were preparing we ended up with 194,507 voters that got ballots. We had a couple of voters that are floating out there, and we can't figure them out. And Dennis's colleague, our senior business analyst that was working with us, she worked and nailed down one voter and figured out that the state had the wrong zip code for that voter. And she created a little program to override the state voter registration database to make sure that when our printer and mailer got it, that they'd get it to the right zip code. So all of the RDI team, they really cared about every single voter, and it showed both from the beginning to get them mailed until the end when we're counting them. So thank you very much, and I'll be sure to let Dennis and
One other
his
thing,
team
Barbara, I
know.
had a request from somebody that worked there. They would like us to try and get them massage chairs. Something about as they're crunched over a screen for hours. They said, would you at least try and get somebody to donate some massage chairs? Not the ones that put a quarter in, but the ones you can set for a specific time. Because they told me after working that long behind the screen, your whole body gets tense. So, but thank you, Barbara.
You're welcome.
We appreciate it. Okay. Let's vote on the certification election. Bring it up, please. Please vote. Mr. Dyson, you need to vote, sir. That's approved. Election has been certified. Again, thank you so much for this. Okay, we're now down to item 15B, Assembly Reorganization. For those that haven't been through this before, I've got the handy
Mr.
cheat
Chair?
sheet in front of me.
Before we move to that, can I
Yeah.
ask for just a very brief moment of personal privilege?
Okay.
And I don't intend to alienate any of the members of this body, but I do want to speak briefly to the fact that in this election, Anchorage did something historic. Now that the election's certified, I'll speak about it. The fact is that for the first time in the United States of America, at the ballot box, the voters of a community, our fair city, decided that they were not going to buy into fear and sanction the direct targeting of an individual group of people to remove them from the protections under law. And the individual who worked really hard to do that is Katie Ward, who's in the room right now. And I want to give her many thanks and Anchorage many thanks that we did the right thing in this election. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Let me getting back to this now. This is the procedure for organization of the Assembly. The municipal clerk shall administer the election of chair and vice chair. The election of chair and vice chair of the Assembly shall be in the following manner. Number one, nominations shall be heard from as many members of the Assembly as shall desire to make them. Number two, at the close of nominations, a secret ballot shall be taken. I used to like it better we had it on the screen, but they don't do that anymore. A majority vote of all members of the Assembly shall be required for election to each office. For if no majority is cast for any candidate, renomination of candidates for the office shall occur and another secret ballot shall be taken. The procedure shall continue until one person receives a majority vote and is elected. The term of the office of the chair and vice chair of the Assembly shall be at the pleasure of the Assembly. In other words, just because we elect somebody today doesn't mean we can't get rid of them next month or next day. It's happened before. Yeah. John, you were in the queue to speak on what, sir?
Well, I was actually going to ask if Mr. Sells could speak on an election issue, but since we've moved on to this, I suppose he could wait till the end.
Why don't we wait till the end? We'll get that person to be heard.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Barbara, are you going to do it, or is Lisa? Lisa? You're now chair of this organization to deal with this.
Okay, the floor is now open for nominations for chair of the Assembly.
So we just time it. I'd move Assemblyman Dunbar for chair. Nominate. Thank you.
Any other nominations?
Yeah, I'd like to move Eric Croft for vice chair.
Just for chair at this time.
Madam Clerk, I nominate Assemblymember Trainee for chair.
Any other nominations? Okay, the floor is now closed for nominations for chair. We'll pass out your ballot at this time.
We don't get to lobby for our guy. What? What? I have oration.
No.
Which side do we write on? Did you sign the outside?
The results of the votes, we have a new chair, Forrest Dunbar.
Congratulations. We don't change right now. She's like to run for vice chair.
The floor is now open for nominations for vice chair.
I again would like to nominate Eric Croft for vice chair.
Any other nominations? The floor is now closed for nominations, and Eric Croft is the new vice chair.
You can take your chair now, guy.
So, Madam Clerk, we're moving on to audience participation.
I'm in the queue.
What's that?
I'm in the queue.
Oh.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
I just want to briefly, Assemblyman Trainee will always be Chair Trainee, I think, because for most of the time I've been involved, he has been Chair Trainee. And, I think this transition is important, though, because he's been chair forever, and we need to have some transition to some new talent in that position. Mr. Trainee's got one more year, and so I'm glad. It's good to see some new people. Assemblyman Dunbar has been vice chair for the past year, so it seems natural to move him along. So thank you. And thank you, Mr. Trainee, for the past year or two as chair.
Thank you, Mr.
Not
Weddleton.
forever, just 9 years.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. I guess I'd like to echo that as well. I really value the time that I spent as vice chair with Dick as the chair, and he's not going anywhere. He's still on the body, so I very much hope to rely on his advice going forward for the next year or however long it will be. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. And kind of a hallmark, Mr. Trainee, of your leadership is that you were a clear advocate for allowing everyone to speak and having open floor of communication to all members properly under the rules, because that is how deliberations are supposed to happen. And so I challenge the new chair to ensure that the process is open to all of us, because every single one of us has an important voice in this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Absolutely. So we do have time for assembly comments after audience participation as well tonight, so hopefully there'll be time for further comments if anyone would like to make them. At this time, I'd like to open the floor to audience participation. Yes, and if you could show me how to use the timer, I'd appreciate it. Is there anyone who would like to be heard on a matter not addressed today at the assembly meeting? Anyone at all? Yeah, sir. Please state your name for the record and where you're from.
My name is Scott Sell. I'm from Anchorage, the Rabbit Creek area. I sent all of you an email earlier today, and all I can say is what I found on out. I guess I would be disappointed with the Assembly for changing rules, because what I found out today is my vote for my limited road service area did not count. That's because in my limited road service area, it was a blank box. Nobody signed up for it by the appropriate time. All it said was write in. Everybody assumes that you write on in. However, from what I found out from Ms. Jones today, in order to be a write-in, you have to file at the clerk's office. Now, that's kind of redundant because the box says write in. It doesn't say go to the clerk's office and that. But you guys changed the rules from what I can tell from what she sent me in 2016. Before that, it appeared that if there was nobody running, you wrote in somebody's name, and then the elections people sorted out all of the names, called whoever won, see if that person would take it or not, and then if nothing else, you'd go down the line. That's not what's happened here. In my limited road service area, there is 112 uncounted votes. The one that somehow the name got registered after the ballots were printed got 11 votes. So there's 112 votes that somebody could be more than the 11. Why don't we count? And this is not the only limited road service area, because I went through them, and there is a number of unresolved votes. And that makes me very disappointed that my vote didn't count. I've been voting in Anchorage since '74 at every election. I've probably voted for all of you guys. At least your names were on there. But when the ballot comes on out and there is no name except for a write-in, a person's, whoever wrote it down, that vote should be counted, and it's not.
Sorry. Are there any questions?
Yeah, just
Mr. Weddleton?
This is important. I think it's something that we can correct by education and then rewording on the ballot. But it's unfortunate it happened this time. And if anyone thinks, well, this is just a LRSA, it's only small, it's 220-something people in the whole city, the LRSAs deal with the road in front of your house, plowing your road. And there was a big drainage issue that was frustrating for many of the people in this LRSA. That they didn't feel was resolved properly, and that could have impacted why someone was nominated for this. So it's unfortunate that this happened. I think we can correct it moving forward, and even these small LRSAs, those votes are very, very important. So thanks.
Mr. Peterson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The votes for the limited road service area boards have been sort of a sticking point for quite a long time. We have to print a large number of different types of ballots. I think we had over 100 different ballot types in this election, and most of that is because of the road service board in different areas. And it would be amazingly fantastic if we could switch that over to where those people were elected at their local community council. And so that's something we may actually be taking a look at later this year. I think our Ethics and Election Committee will be having a discussion about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I was going to suggest it was an appropriate topic the clerk suggested for the Ethics and Election Committee. Sir, would you mind spelling your name for the record?
S-E-L-L.
Okay, thank you. There are no further questions. Thank you very much for coming.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard tonight? Any other audience participation? Okay. With that, we will move on to assembly comments. Would anyone like to make a comment before we adjourn this evening? Actually, let's start. Maybe we can move down the line. Mr. Dyson, would you like to make any comments this evening?
No, except well done on the election, and it's been a pleasure to serve with you all for this last year.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Ms. Demboski? Thank you. Mr. Constant? Ms. Peterson? Mr. Peterson, sorry.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank all the election workers again and the team that got together to certify the election, everyone who was involved. It was a team effort from the beginning, and we did okay. We'll be able to do a little better next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Croft?
No, thank you.
Mr. Traney? Nope. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you to Mr. Traney for his leadership.
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, thank you to Mr. Trini, but also the comment's a good comment in terms of that seems like that's an issue that we've got to deal with in terms of education of the voters. If we don't have somebody, we need to find a recruiting technique, or we need to use the community councils. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Traney. Mr. Steele. Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to exalt Chair Traney, as my colleague so eloquently stated, and I think it's probably time that we got a new shirt made for you, Chair Traney.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Weddleton.
Nothing, thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to echo some of my colleagues' comments. First, Mr. Constant's comment about Proposition 1 and Ms. Ward and the work that her and the others at Fair Anchorage did, which I think was a very important moment in the history of our city. And as Mr. Constant mentioned, actually was in the history of the country, but particularly for us here that care so much about the issue. Mr. Peterson and everyone else's comments about the election, I also want to say congratulations to the clerk and everyone the team that helped pull it off. And finally, I just want to say truly thank you to Mr. Traney for his leadership, and I'm sure his continued leadership on the body. You know, one of the major goals this year, working with Mr. Traney as the vice chair, is we wanted to try to provide the resources so that vote by mail would would be a success. And I think his leadership combined with the election team is one of the major reasons that it was. So again, thank you, Mr. Trainee, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? Second. All right. We're adjourned.